The crystal spires of Kepler 442b reached toward the purple sky like frozen lightning. Each tower held the memories of 50,000 years, built from materials that bent light and time itself. The Valduri had ruled the galaxy from this world. Since before most stars were born, their bodies were living crystals that stored every moment of their long lives, making them walking libraries of galactic history. High Counselor Zephron stood in the center of the great hall, his crystalline form pulsing with worried light. Around him, 20 other Valduri elders sat in their ancient chairs, each one carved from a single massive gem. The emergency session had been called for one reason. The humans were becoming a problem. We have watched civilizations rise and fall, like waves on a shore, Zephron said, his voice echoing through the crystal chamber. Every species follows the same path. They discover fire, then metals, then space travel. They expand for a time, reach their limits, and settle into their proper place in the galactic order. Every species except one. The other counselors shifted. In their seats, they all knew which species he meant. Humanity had been discovered only 3 years ago, but already they were breaking every rule the galaxy had followed for millennia. Elder Morthic, the oldest among them at 8,000 years, spoke next. His voice was like wind through broken glass. I have seen 3,000 species join the Galactic Concordat. Each one accepted their designated role. The strong became protectors, the wise became advisors, the peaceful became traders. Order was maintained, but these humans refused to accept any limits at all. In the vast darkness of space near the Vega system, Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of his ship, the Horizon's Edge. The human exploration vessel was small compared to the massive Valduri patrol ship that had just appeared beside them, but Jake felt no fear. Humans had learned long ago that size didn't always mean strength. Incoming transmission, said Lieutenant Kelly Barnes from her position at the communications console. It's from the alien vessel. Put it through, Jake replied. The main screen flickered to life, showing a tall crystalline being wearing what looked like flowing robes made of liquid starlight. The alien's face was hard to read, but Jake could sense tension in its glowing form. Greetings, human vessel, the Valduri officer said through the translation matrix. I am Commander Velkoth of the Valduri Empire. We bring word from the Galactic Concordat. Your species has been selected for membership in our great alliance. Jake raised an eyebrow. Selected? That's interesting. We weren't aware we had applied for anything. The Valduri commander's glow dimmed slightly. Application is not required. The Concordat exists to maintain order and peace throughout the galaxy. All spacefaring species must take their proper place within this structure. And what place would that be? Jake asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Humanity will be granted junior species status. You will be allowed to inhabit 12 star systems in the Outer Rim territories. Your expansion will be monitored and regulated to ensure galactic stability. In return, you will receive protection from hostile forces and access to certain approved technologies. The bridge of the Horizon's Edge fell silent. Jake could feel his crew's eyes on him, waiting for his response. He thought about Earth, about the colonies already spreading across dozens of worlds, about the human spirit that had never accepted. The word impossible. We appreciate the offer, Commander Velkoth, Jake said finally. But humanity doesn't accept limitations imposed by others. We'll find our own path among the stars. The Valduri commander's form flared with bright light. You do not understand. This is not a request. This is how the galaxy maintains order. No species has ever refused membership in the Concordat. Jake smiled. Well, there's a first time for everything. Back on Kepler 442b, the news of humanity's refusal sent shockwaves through the Valduri Council. Elder Zethkal, whose memories stretched back 40,000 years, stood up from her chair with shaking movements. "This is unprecedented," she said. "In all my years, no species has ever rejected the wisdom of the Concordat. They show no respect for our age, no fear of our power. What kind of beings are these humans?" High Counselor Zephron activated the central display, showing images gathered from their surveillance of human space. Cities on a dozen worlds, ships moving between star systems, colonies being built on planets that other species had deemed uninhabitable. "They are pattern breakers," he said. "Look at their expansion rate. In 3 years, they have established permanent settlements in over 30 star systems. Most species take centuries to achieve such spread. They ignore natural barriers, overcome impossible odds, and worst of all, they share their discoveries freely among their colonies." The display showed human ships arriving at a world covered in toxic storms. Within months, the humans had built cities that not only survived the harsh conditions, but seemed to thrive in them. They had turned a death world into a garden. "How is this possible?" asked Elder Von Roth. "Our models predict that such rapid expansion should lead to resource depletion and social collapse. Yet their colonies grow stronger, not weaker." "Because they don't follow our models," Zephron replied. "They create new solutions faster than we can study their problems. They adapt and change in ways we never considered possible." In the outer rim territories, Dr. Lisa Harper worked late in her laboratory aboard the research station New Frontier. The xenobiologist had been studying the data collected from first contact with the Valdari, and what she found troubled her. "Computer, display Valdari historical expansion patterns," she said. The holographic display showed the slow, steady growth of the crystal being's empire over 50 millennia. It was impressive in its scope, but predictable in its pattern. "Now, overlay human expansion data." New lines appeared on the display, chaotic and seemingly random, but incredibly fast. In just 3 years, humanity had covered more territory than the Valdari had claimed in their first 1,000 years. But that wasn't what worried Lisa. What worried her was the Valdari's reaction to humanity's growth. They seemed genuinely afraid, and beings who had lived for thousands of years weren't easily frightened. "Computer, analyze Valdari behavioral patterns. Focus on adaptation and innovation rates." The results made Lisa's blood run cold. The Valdari had barely changed in 10,000 years. Their technology, their society, even their art had remained essentially the same. They weren't wise ancients guiding younger species. They were a civilization that had stopped growing, stopped changing, stopped dreaming of better possibilities. And now they had encountered a species that refused to stop growing, refused to accept limits, refused to believe that this is how things have always been, was a good enough reason to stop trying to make things better. Lisa realized that the Valdari weren't afraid of human weapons or human ships. They were afraid of human ideas. They were afraid that other species might look at humanity and start to wonder why they had accepted limitations in the first place. On Kepler 442b, High Counselor Zephron called for silence in the Great Hall. The debate had raged for hours, but a decision had to be made. "The humans represent a threat to the natural order," he declared. "Their refusal to accept proper limits will inspire chaos among the younger species. If we allow this behavior to continue, the entire galactic hierarchy could collapse." Elder Morthic nodded slowly. "What do you propose?" "We demonstrate our power," Zephron said. "We show them and all other species what happens when the wisdom of ages is defied. The humans will learn their place, or they will learn the price of defiance." But even as the ancient council made their plans, human ships continued to spread across the galaxy, carrying with them an idea more dangerous than any weapon: the belief that growth and change and dreams of better tomorrows were the birthright. Of every thinking being in the universe, the age of artificial limits was about to face its greatest challenge. 3 months had passed since the humans refused to join the Galactic Concordat, and the Valdari were growing more worried each day. High Counselor Zefron had deployed the most advanced surveillance network in the galaxy to watch human space. What they discovered made their crystalline hearts pulse with fear. The monitoring station, orbiting a dead moon at the edge of human territory, collected data day and night. Every human ship movement, every communication signal, every new colony was recorded and analyzed. The Valdari had used this same system to predict the behavior of thousands of species over 50 millennia. It had never failed them before. But with humans, the predictions were wrong almost every time. The mathematical models are breaking down, reported Surveillance Chief Keilthan to the Emergency Council session. According to our calculations, the human colony on Proxima 7 should have failed within weeks. The planet has deadly radiation storms and toxic soil. No species has ever successfully settled there. The holographic display showed images of Proxima 7, where the Valdari expected to find a failed colony or dead bodies. They saw thriving cities protected by energy shields that bent and twisted the radiation away. The toxic soil had been converted into fertile farmland using techniques that shouldn't have been possible. "How long did this transformation take?" asked Elder Morthic. 6 weeks, Keilthan replied. The council chamber fell silent. The Valdari themselves would have needed decades to accomplish such a feat. If they could do it at all, Dr. Lisa Harper stood in her laboratory aboard the research station New Frontier, staring at data that challenged everything she thought she knew about. Galactic civilization. The Valdari had shared some of their historical records as part of the diplomatic process, probably hoping to impress humans with their ancient wisdom. Instead, Lisa had found something the Valdari didn't seem to realize about themselves. Computer. "Display Valdari technological advancement timeline," she said. The hologram showed a graph that rose steeply for the first few thousand years of Valdari civilization, then gradually flattened out. For the last 20,000 years, the line was almost completely flat. Now show human technological advancement. A new line appeared, short but rising at an incredible angle. In just 3 years, humans had made advances that equaled thousands of years of Valdari progress. But the real discovery came when Lisa compared the Valdari data to other species in the Galactic Concordat. Every single member civilization showed the same pattern: rapid early growth followed by long periods of stagnation. It was as if joining the Concordat caused species to stop innovating. Lisa realized that the galaxy's wise elders weren't wise at all. They were evolutionarily stagnant. They had become so focused on maintaining order and following established patterns that they had lost the ability to truly innovate or adapt. Meanwhile, in the disputed region known as the Centauri Gap, Commander Ben Carter was proving that humans didn't just adapt to impossible conditions. They thrived on them. The Centauri Gap was a region of space that 3 different alien species claimed, but none had successfully settled. The area was filled with unstable stars that produced unpredictable gravity waves and radiation bursts. Ships that entered the region often never came out. Establishing colony beacon on planet designated Echo 7, Carter reported to the human Fleet Command. His small task force of 12 ships had been in the gap for 2 months, and they had already established permanent bases on 5 worlds. "How are you managing the stellar instabilities?" asked Admiral Patricia Wells over the quantum communication link. "We're not managing them," Carter replied with a grin. "We're using them. The gravity waves compress our fusion reactors, giving us 3 times normal power output. The radiation bursts charge our shield generators. What everyone else saw as obstacles, we saw as opportunities." The human colonies in the Centauri Gap quickly became marvels of adaptive engineering. Cities that moved and shifted with the gravity waves, power plants that fed on stellar radiation, transportation systems that rode the unstable spacetime, currents like surfers on cosmic waves. What amazed observers from other species was how quickly humans shared these innovations. Within weeks of developing gravity wave surfing technology, detailed blueprints were transmitted to every human colony. There were no patents, no trade secrets, no attempts to hoard the knowledge for advantage. This behavior baffled the Valderie completely. In their experience, species guarded their technological advances jealously. Competition and secrecy were supposed to be natural laws of civilization. But humans seemed to believe that making everyone stronger made them stronger too. Elder Zethkal studied the human data with growing alarm. Their expansion rate is accelerating, she told the council. Each new colony they establish makes the next one easier to build. They're creating a network effect that multiplies their capabilities. The display showed human space as a web of connected points, with resources and knowledge flowing freely between worlds. New colonies received support from established ones, while older settlements benefited from innovations developed on the frontier. This is not natural, declared Elder Vomroth. Species are supposed to compete for resources, not share them freely. How can they maintain control if they give away their advantages? But that was exactly what the Valderai didn't understand about humans. They weren't trying to maintain control. They were trying to grow, to explore, to become something better than what they were. And they believed that lifting others up was the best way to reach greater heights themselves. The breaking point came when human explorers made contact with the Zephyrian coalition, a group of 6 species in the outer spiral. The Zephyrians had been under Valdari protection for 3,000 years, which in practice meant they were kept at a primitive technological level and required permission for any major decisions. Captain Amy Rodriguez approached the Zephyrian homeworld in her ship, the Unity Bridge. The Zephyrians were a peaceful, artistic people who had once been great builders and inventors. Under Valdari guidance, they had been reduced to subsistence farming and simple crafts. "We come in peace," Rodriguez transmitted to the Zephyrian leadership. "We're interested in trade and cultural exchange." The Zephyrian premier, a tall being with flowing tentacles and gentle eyes, seemed nervous about the contact. "We must request permission from our Valdari overseers before engaging in trade negotiations." "Why?" Rodriguez asked simply. The question seemed to confuse the premier. "Because that is how it has always been. The Valdari are ancient and wise. They know what is best for younger species." Rodriguez smiled. "What do you think is best for your people?" It was a question the Zephyrians hadn't been asked in millennia. Over the following weeks, Rodriguez and her team worked with Zephyrian scientists and engineers to develop new technologies and trade agreements. They shared human manufacturing techniques, defensive systems, and most importantly, the idea that every species had the right to determine its own destiny. The results were extraordinary. Within months, Zephyrian worlds were producing goods and technologies they hadn't created in thousands of years. Their art began to flourish again as they rediscovered their creative potential. For the first time in generations, young Zephyrians began to dream of exploring the stars. When word of the Human-Zephyrian alliance reached the Valdari Council, the reaction was one of pure terror. "This cannot be allowed to continue," Zephron declared. "If the younger species begin to believe they can develop independently, the entire galactic order will collapse. We will have chaos instead of stability." But Elder Morthek, studying the reports from Zephyrian space, made an observation that chilled the council to their crystalline cores. "Look at their innovation rate," he said. "In 6 months of working with humans, the Zephyrians have advanced further than they did in the previous 1,000 years under our guidance. The humans aren't just breaking our rules. They're proving that our rules were holding everyone back. The ancient Valdari faced a terrifying realization. For 50,000 years, they had maintained galactic order by convincing younger species that limitations were necessary. That growth had to be controlled, that only the eldest and wisest should make decisions for everyone else. But humans were, proving that unlimited growth was possible, that cooperation could achieve more than control ever had, and that every species had untapped potential waiting to be unleashed. The humans weren't just threatening the Valdari Empire. They were threatening the very idea that some beings were born to rule while others were born to be ruled. And that idea, once broken, could never be put back together again, not as reports of human-inspired revolutions began to filter in from across the galaxy. The Valdari realized they faced the greatest crisis in their long history. The age of artificial limits was ending, and they weren't sure they could survive in a galaxy where every species believed in their own unlimited potential. The message arrived at the Valdari capital during the darkest hour of their night cycle. It came not from human space, but from the Krillian hegemony, the galaxy's second oldest civilization. The Krillians were insectoid beings with hive minds that had controlled the southern spiral arm for 30,000 years. If they were reaching out to the Valdari, something was very wrong. High Counselor Zephron read the transmission with growing dread. The Krillian Hive Queen reported that human ships had been seen in their territory, making contact with species the Krillians considered their protected subjects. Worse yet, these contacts were resulting in formal alliances and trade agreements that completely bypassed Krillian authority. They are spreading their poison, the message stated in the clicking, mechanical language of the hive mind. The managed species begin to question our guidance. They speak of rights and freedoms and unlimited potential. This infection must be stopped before it destroys everything we have built. The emergency council session convened within hours. Elder Morthic's crystalline form flickered with agitated light as he addressed the gathered Valdari leaders. The humans have formed what they call a mutual defense treaty with the Zephyrian Coalition, he reported. 6 species that have been under Krillian management for millennia have now declared themselves independent. They claim the right to govern their own affairs. The holographic display showed the affected region of space. Red markers indicated Krillian-controlled worlds that had suddenly gone dark to their overseers' communications. Green markers showed new human presence in those same systems. The pattern was clear and terrifying. Captain Amy Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the Unity Bridge, watching as the first joint human Zephyrian patrol fleet prepared for departure. The sight filled her with pride and hope. 12 human vessels worked alongside 18 Zephyrian ships, their crews learning from each other and sharing technologies that made both fleets stronger. Captain, we're receiving a transmission from the Krillian battle cruiser approaching from Sector 7, reported Communications Officer Tony Mitchell. Put it through, Rodriguez replied. The main screen filled with the image of a massive insectoid creature, its compound eyes reflecting the bridge lights like fractured mirrors. The Krillian commander spoke through a translation device that gave its voice a harsh mechanical tone. Human vessel, you are operating in Krillian space without authorization. The species you have contacted are under our protection and management. You will cease all interactions and depart immediately. Rodriguez looked at Premier Veltar of the Zephyrians, who stood beside her on the bridge. The gentle being's tentacles rippled with nervous energy, but his voice was steady when he spoke. With respect, Commander, we are no longer under Krillian management. We have chosen to form our own alliances and determine our own future. The Krillian's mandibles clicked aggressively. You do not have the wisdom or experience to make such decisions. For 3,000 years, we have protected you from the chaos of unmanaged development. You will return to your proper place in the Galactic Order. Or what? Rodriguez asked simply, The question seemed to catch the Krillian off guard. For millennia, the threat of losing elder species protection had been enough to keep younger civilizations in line. But humans had shown that protection often looked very much like imprisonment. "You do not understand the forces you are unleashing," the Krillian commander said. "Without proper guidance, species destroy themselves. We have seen it happen countless times." Rodriguez smiled. "Maybe they destroy themselves because they're not allowed to learn from their mistakes. Maybe they need the freedom to fail so they can learn to succeed." The Krillian connection ended abruptly, but Rodriguez knew this was far from over. The elder species were beginning to coordinate their response to humanity's influence. On the Krillian homeworld of Nexus Prime, Queen Zoct H felt the disturbance ripple through the hive mind. For the first time in thousands of years, species under Krillian care were rejecting their guidance. The humans had shown them that alternatives existed, that growth and change were possible. The Queen's thoughts merged with those of her billions of offspring as they analyzed the situation. The humans weren't just stealing territory or resources. They were stealing something far more valuable: the belief systems that kept the galactic hierarchy stable. "Contact the Valdari Council," the Queen commanded through the hive mind. "This threat requires coordinated action." Meanwhile, in human space, Dr. Kevin Walsh was putting the finishing touches on a research paper that would change the galaxy forever. The anthropologist had spent months studying the data collected from contacts with various alien civilizations, and his conclusions were explosive. Computer finalized the document titled "Artificial Scarcity and the Galactic Development Crisis." He said to his research station's AI, "Prepare for wide distribution across all human networks." The paper argued that the galaxy's elder species had created a system of controlled scarcity and limited development that kept younger civilizations dependent and weak. Walsh presented evidence that species under elder guidance showed dramatically reduced rates of innovation, exploration, and cultural growth compared to their potential capabilities. "The galactic order is not stability," Walsh wrote in his conclusion. "It is stagnation disguised as wisdom. The elder species maintain their power not by being superior, but by convincing everyone else that they are inferior." Within hours of publication, the paper was spreading through human space like wildfire. Colony governors shared it with their councils, ship captains discussed it with their crews, and scientists used it as the basis for new research into alien development patterns. But the paper didn't stay in human space for long. Trade routes carried human merchants to dozens of alien worlds, and they brought ideas along with their goods. The paper was translated into hundreds of languages and shared through networks the elder species didn't monitor. On the water world of Aquatica, the dolphin-like Shatari read Walsh's research with growing excitement. For 2,000 years, they had been told by their Valdari overseers that their aquatic nature made them unsuitable for space travel. But the paper showed evidence that similar species had successfully developed spacefaring technology when given the freedom to innovate. On the desert planet of Iridian, the insectoid Scarp-D discovered that their ancestors had once been master terraformers before Krillian management convinced them to accept their harsh world as unchangeable. They began to wonder what their homeworld could become if they were allowed to try again. The effects reached even the core worlds of the Galactic Concordat. On Centris Major, representatives from dozens of species gathered in secret to discuss ideas that would have been considered treason just months earlier. They spoke of self-determination, unlimited development, and the right to reach for the stars without asking permission from ancient overseers. Elder Zithkal monitored these developments with growing horror. "The infection is spreading faster than we predicted," she reported to the Valdari Council. 17 member species have formally requested modifications to their Concordat agreements. They want expanded territories, technological sharing arrangements, and reduced oversight. This is what we feared, High Counselor Zephyron replied. The humans have shown them that our authority is not absolute. They begin to believe they have choices. The crisis deepened when Ambassador Claire Foster addressed the Galactic Concordat directly through quantum communication. Her message was broadcast simultaneously to every member world, bypassing the usual channels that allowed elder species to filter information. People of the galaxy, Foster began, her words reaching billions of beings across thousands of worlds. We stand at a crossroads in galactic history. For too long, artificial limitations have held back the incredible potential that exists within every thinking species. The transmission showed images of human colonies thriving in impossible conditions, of former Krillian subjects building wonders their overseers said were beyond their capabilities, of Zephyrian artists creating beauty. That had been suppressed for millennia. The galaxy is vast enough for all of us to grow and prosper, Foster continued. The age of artificial limitations is over. We invite all species to join us in exploring the unlimited potential of cooperative civilization. The reaction was immediate and unprecedented. Within hours, protests erupted on dozens of worlds as younger species demanded the same freedoms humans had shown were possible. Independence movements that had been dormant for centuries suddenly came back to life. Trade networks that had operated under elder species control for millennia began establishing direct relationships with human colonies. On Kepler 442b, the Valdari Council faced the collapse of everything they had built. Elder Von Roth stood before the Crystal Assembly with news that shook them to their cores. 17 species have formally withdrawn from the Concordat, he announced. They cite the human model of cooperative development as their inspiration. They no longer recognize our authority to limit their growth or determine their futures. High Counselor Zephyron felt the weight of 50,000 years of history pressing down on him. The carefully maintained order that had kept the galaxy stable was crumbling, and there seemed to be no way to stop it. What have we done? The Valdari decided to make their final stand at the human colony of New Haven, a thriving world in the Outer Rim territories. High Counselor Zephyron himself led the operation, bringing with him the most advanced gravity manipulation technology the ancient empire possessed. They would seal the planet in a bubble of twisted space-time that no ship could penetrate. The humans would learn that defying 50,000 years of galactic order came with consequences. The massive Valdari fleet emerged from hyperspace around New Haven like crystalline predators. 12 dreadnoughts, each one the size of a small moon, took positions around the planet. Their hulls pulsed with the same energy that had built the crystal spires of Kepler 442b, technology so advanced that most species couldn't even understand how it worked. Governor Maria Santos stood in the Emergency Command Center on New Haven's surface, watching the alien ships through the observation windows. The planet held 2 million human colonists and another 500,000 refugees from species that had fled their elder overseers to seek freedom in human space. They're activating some kind of field generators, reported Chief Engineer Carlos Rivera. Energy readings are off the charts. I've never seen anything like it. The space around New Haven began to shimmer and bend. Stars disappeared and reappeared in wrong positions as gravity itself was twisted into impossible shapes. Within hours, the planet was trapped inside a barrier that made hyperspace travel impossible and blocked all communications with the outside galaxy. Zephyron broadcast a message to the trapped colonists. Humans of New Haven, you have seen the power of the Valdari Empire. This barrier cannot be broken by any technology in the galaxy. Your isolation will continue until your species accepts its proper place in the galactic order. But the Valdari had made a crucial mistake. They assumed that humans would respond to superior technology with fear and submission, just as every other species had done for millennia. They didn't understand that humans saw impossible challenges as opportunities to prove that nothing was. Truly impossible. Colonel Dan Phillips received the distress signal from New Haven, just as the barrier completed its formation. The veteran military officer commanded a task force of 30 human ships, but he knew that conventional weapons would be useless against Valdari gravity technology. "Sir, we're receiving offers of assistance from allied fleets," reported his communications officer. "The Zephyrian Coalition has dispatched 12 vessels, and 6 other species are sending support ships." Phillips nodded. This was exactly what the humans had been building toward. Not a galaxy where humanity stood alone, but one where all species stood together. "Accept all offers of assistance," he ordered, "and get me a direct line to Dr. Harper on the new frontier. If anyone can figure out how to break this barrier, it's her." Dr. Lisa Harper had been studying Valdari technology since first contact, and the gravity barrier around New Haven gave her the best data she'd ever collected. Working with scientists from 7 different species, she began to unravel the secrets of space-time manipulation that the Valdari had guarded for millennia. The barrier works by creating a localized gravity well that compresses space-time, she explained to Phillips over the quantum link. "But it's not perfect. There are resonance frequencies where the field becomes unstable." "How long would it take you to exploit those frequencies?" Phillips asked. "With just human technology?" "Maybe 6 months, but working with our allies, sharing data and perspectives, combining different approaches to the problem, ... double quotes. Harper paused, running calculations in her head. "Give me 72 hours. The combined fleet worked around the clock. Zephyrian scientists contributed their understanding of harmonic frequencies. The aquatic Shatari provided insights into fluid dynamics that applied to space-time flow. The desert-dwelling Scarpti shared mathematical models they had developed for predicting sandstorm patterns, which surprisingly applied to gravity field fluctuations. On the second day, they achieved the impossible. Not only did they find a way to destabilize the Valdari barrier, they figured out how to reverse engineer the entire gravity manipulation system. We're not just going to break their cage," Harper told Phillips with excitement in her voice. "We're going to learn how to build our own." The breakthrough came when young engineer Sarah Kim realized that the Valdari technology was based on principles humans had been exploring in theoretical physics for decades. The ancient aliens hadn't discovered something entirely new. They had simply had more time to develop concepts that multiple species could have achieved if they'd been allowed to pursue unlimited research. Within hours, the combined fleet was implementing gravity manipulation systems on their own ships. The Zephyrians proved particularly gifted at harmonic tuning, while human engineers excelled at miniaturizing the technology. Working together, they accomplished in days what the Valdari had taken centuries to perfect. The assault on the barrier began at dawn on the 3rd day. Instead of trying to break through the Valdari field, the Allied ships created their own gravity waves that interfered with the ancient technology. The barrier didn't just collapse. It inverted, trapping the Valdari fleet in the same kind of prison they had tried to use on New Haven. Zephyron felt his crystalline heart crack as he watched. Impossible readings on his instruments. The humans and their allies hadn't just escaped his trap. They had turned his own technology against him and improved upon it in the process. How is this possible? He transmitted to the Allied fleet. This technology took us thousands of years to develop. Colonel Phillips responded personally. Because you developed it alone. We developed it together. When you share knowledge instead of hoarding it, when you combine different perspectives instead of imposing one view, you can achieve things that seemed impossible. The news of the barrier's reversal spread across the galaxy faster than light. Itself, the Valdari Empire which had seemed invincible for 50 millennia, had been defeated by a hastily assembled fleet of ships from species they considered primitive. More importantly, the technology that had been the foundation of Valdari. Power was now freely available to anyone who wanted to learn it. On Kepler 442b, Elder Morthek addressed the emergency council session with a voice like breaking glass. The impossible has become routine for these humans and their allies. They don't just adapt to our technology. They master it, improve it, and share it with everyone. The council chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. If younger species could match or exceed Valdari technology, what was the basis for continued elder dominance? If cooperation could achieve more than control, why should anyone accept limitations imposed by ancient overseers? Elder Zethkal spoke. The words that everyone was thinking, but no one wanted to say. We have lost. Not just this battle, but the entire foundation of our authority. We can no longer claim that age equals wisdom when youth combined with cooperation achieves more than either could alone. The Galactic Concordat was already fracturing beyond repair. 23 species had formally withdrawn, declaring their independence from elder oversight. Another dozen were in open rebellion, using human-provided technology to defend themselves against efforts to restore the old order. But the most devastating blow came from an unexpected source. The Krillian hegemony, faced with similar uprisings in their territory, sent a message to the Valdari Council that shook the ancient beings to their cores. We propose immediate negotiations with the human leadership, Queen Zakth announced. Continued resistance will only result in the complete destruction of galactic order. Perhaps it is time to learn from these pattern breakers instead of fighting them. The message was more than a military communication. It was an admission that the age of elder species dominance was ending. The Krillians, who had never backed down from a fight in 30,000 years, were ready to negotiate with beings they had considered primitive just months earlier. High Counselor Zifron stood, alone in his crystal chamber, watching reports flow in from across the galaxy. Everywhere, the old order was collapsing. Species that had been kept apart for millennia were forming new alliances. Technologies that had been restricted to elder races were spreading freely. Dreams that had been suppressed for generations were finally becoming reality. What have we become? He whispered to the empty chamber. In our fear of chaos, did we create something worse? Did we turn wisdom into stagnation, guidance into oppression, order into prison? The answer came not from his own thoughts, but from a transmission broadcast across all frequencies by Ambassador Claire Foster. Her words reached every world, every ship, every being in the galaxy. The age of artificial limits is ending, she announced. We invite all species, young and old, to join us in building a galaxy where every dream is possible, where every being can reach their full potential, where cooperation creates possibilities that control never could. For the first time in 50,000 years, the Valdari faced a choice. They could continue fighting to maintain a system that was already dead, or they could learn to live in a galaxy where wisdom came not from age, but from the willingness to grow, to change, and to believe that tomorrow could be better than today. The humans had won not through superior weapons or technology, but by proving that their vision of unlimited potential was more powerful than any foe. 6 months after the collapse of the Galactic Concordat, the galaxy was unrecognizable from what it had been for 50,000 years. The ancient order was gone, replaced by something that no one had ever imagined possible. Instead of chaos and destruction, the freedom to grow and change had created the greatest period of prosperity and innovation in galactic history. Admiral Greg Thompson stood on the bridge of the massive space station New Harmony, watching ships from hundreds of different worlds dock at the platforms that stretched out like the branches of a metal tree. The station floated in neutral space, a gift from humanity to the galaxy, and a symbol of the new age of cooperation. Status report, Thompson requested from his operations officer. Docking bays 1 through 50 are handling refugee transport. Ships from former Valdari territory. Lieutenant Commander Nancy Walsh reported. Bays 51 through 100 are processing trade vessels from the free Zephyrian worlds. The Krillian delegation is scheduled to arrive in Bay 101 in 30 minutes. Thompson nodded, still amazed by how much had changed. The Krillian. Hegemony, once the galaxy's most rigid civilization, was sending diplomats to learn about cooperative government. Half of their former territory had declared independence, and instead of trying to reconquer those worlds, Queen Zaxth had chosen to negotiate. The transformation hadn't been without problems. Some regions had descended into conflict as newly independent species settled old grievances that had been suppressed for millennia. Trade routes that had operated under elder species control for thousands of years were disrupted when those species suddenly found themselves without the authority to manage them. But where others saw chaos, humans saw opportunity. Admiral Thompson commanded the largest human fleet ever assembled, but his ships weren't weapons of conquest. They were peacekeepers, protecting refugee convoys and maintaining security for the new trade networks that were emerging from the ruins of the old order. Admiral, we're receiving a priority transmission from the Centauri Gap colonies, reported Communications Officer Tony Mitchell. They're requesting assistance with a refugee crisis. What's the situation? Thompson asked. 3 million beings from former Valdari subject worlds are requesting asylum. Their homeworlds are in political upheaval as they transition to self-governance. The colonies want to help, but they need additional resources. Thompson didn't hesitate. Dispatch Supply Convoy 7 with emergency shelters and medical supplies. And send word to the Free Worlds Coalition. This is exactly the kind of crisis that requires coordinated response. This was how the new galaxy worked. Instead of waiting for permission from ancient overseers, species responded directly to crisis. Instead of hoarding resources for their own advantage, they shared what they had to solve common problems. The result was a level of efficiency and compassion that the old order had never achieved. On the former Valdarea homeworld of Kepler 442b, Elder Velther walked through the crystal, gardens that had once been reserved for the ruling council. The ancient spires still reached toward the purple sky, but they no longer symbolized dominance over younger species. They had become monuments to a way of thinking that the galaxy had outgrown. Velther was part of a reformed Valdari council that had made a remarkable decision. After 50,000 years of ruling others, they wanted to learn how to change and grow as humans did. They had approached humanity with an unprecedented request: teach us to be different. The human delegation has arrived, announced Coordinator Zix Tal, a younger Valdari whose crystalline form pulsed with nervous energy. Dr. Stone is ready to begin the cultural exchange program. Dr. Rachel Stone had volunteered to lead the most unusual diplomatic mission in human history. Instead of negotiating treaties or trade agreements, she was helping an entire civilization learn how to embrace change after millennia of stagnation. The first lesson is the hardest one, Stone told the assembled Valdari leaders. You have too. Stop believing that because something has always been done one way, that's the only way it can be done. You have to learn to ask what if instead of why not. The Valdari found this concept almost incomprehensible. Their entire society had been built on the idea that wisdom came from preserving ancient knowledge and maintaining established patterns. The notion that wisdom might come from questioning those patterns and imagining new possibilities was revolutionary, but they were eager students. Across the remaining worlds, Valdari communities began experimenting with concepts they had never considered before. They started sharing their crystalline memory storage technology instead of keeping it secret. They began collaborating with other species on research projects instead of working in isolation. Most importantly, they started asking their own people what they wanted to become, instead of telling them what they had always been. The results were remarkable. Young Valdari, who had been trained only to preserve ancient knowledge, began developing new ideas that combined their crystalline technology with innovations from dozens of other species. Art and music that had remained unchanged for thousands of years suddenly exploded with new forms and expressions. For the first time in memory, Valdari began to dream of futures that were different from their past. Meanwhile, in the former Krillian territories, an even more dramatic transformation was taking place. The hive mind structure that had defined Krillian society for 30,000 years was evolving into something unprecedented. Instead of one queen controlling billions of drones, individual Krillians were developing independent thoughts while maintaining their connection to the collective. Queen Zacht Etch, working with human psychologists and Zephyrian philosophers, was learning to guide instead of control her people. The hive mind became a network for sharing ideas and experiences rather than a tool for enforcing conformity. We discover that cooperation does not require sameness, the Queen explained to a gathering of species leaders at New Harmony Station. Different thoughts make the hive stronger, not weaker. Humans teach us this truth. The transformation of the galaxy's two oldest civilizations inspired changes throughout the known worlds. Species that had been enemies for millennia began working together on projects that benefited everyone. Technologies that had been jealously guarded secrets became open-source innovations that anyone could improve upon. The Free Zephyrian Coalition became a model for how former subject species could govern themselves. Their worlds flourished with art, science, and exploration that had been suppressed for thousands of years. Premier Veltar, speaking at the first Galactic Freedom Assembly, captured the spirit of the New Age. "We were told we needed guardians because we were too young to make wise decisions," he said. "But wisdom is not about age. Wisdom is about learning from mistakes, growing from challenges, and believing that tomorrow can be better than today. These are gifts that every thinking being possesses." The assembly brought together representatives from over 300 species, many of whom were meeting as equals for the first time in their civilization's histories. They didn't create a new empire or concordat to replace the old one. Instead, they established principles for cooperation based on mutual respect and shared benefit. Captain Jake Morrison, now promoted to Fleet Admiral, stood in the observation lounge of New Harmony Station, watching the greatest gathering of diverse species in galactic history. Children from dozens of different worlds played together in the station's parks, speaking to each other in a mixture of languages that somehow everyone understood. His communications officer, Lieutenant Kelly Barnes, joined him at the viewing windows. "Hard to believe it's only been a year since we first met the Valdari," she said. "Sometimes the biggest changes happen faster than anyone expects," Morrison replied. "When an idea's time has come, it spreads like light through the darkness." They watched as a group of young beings worked together on what looked like an art project. Human children collaborated with Valdari youngsters whose crystalline forms sparkled in the artificial sunlight. Zephyrian tentacles guided Krillian manipulator claws as they shaped something beautiful from materials that represented a dozen different worlds. "What do you think they're building?" Barnes asked. Morrison smiled as he recognized the shape taking form. It was a star map, but not like any he had ever seen. Instead of showing territories controlled by different empires, it showed connections between worlds, trade routes that brought prosperity to everyone, and exploration paths that led to discoveries shared by all. "They're building the future," he said. "A galaxy where every species can reach as far as their dreams will take them." The old galaxy had been built on the belief that some beings were meant to rule while others were meant to be ruled. The new galaxy was built on the belief that every thinking being had unlimited potential waiting to be discovered. Humans hadn't conquered the galaxy. They had freed it. They had shown that cooperation could achieve more than control ever had, that sharing knowledge made everyone stronger, and that the only real limits were the ones people chose to accept. As Morrison watched ships from across the galaxy arrive and depart from New Harmony Station, he realized that humanity's greatest victory wasn't defeating the ancient empires. It was proving that a better way was possible and inspiring others to build it together. The age of artifice